All right. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you guys can hear me. Yeah, let me know if you can hear me. And yeah. So by the way, I didn't realize I hadn't pushed the GitHub code. So it's up in GitHub, the stuff that we did on Friday. So you should have access to that. I'll make sure to commit at the end of these sessions. All right. So in the last session, we started talking about you know, styling and theming. The idea here was that, it's possible that, your boss, like you always say that, your boss walks in, it could be anybody, client, whatever. They decide, hey, we want to change things up a bit, right? We want to give it more flair. Hey, we think the green is not good enough. We want to change it to blue or something like that, And so the idea here is that, you want to be able to, not only make it easy for yourself, but you also want to be able to make changes quickly to show the client, right? Again, when I say client, it could be for a big company, or it could be like, if you're doing some freelance work, a side gig or whatever. You want to show that, hey, you can do things quick. Now, just because you do things fast doesn't mean you're gonna get paid less, right? That's not how it works. Or at least you should be careful about how you price yourself when it comes to projects and stuff like freelance. You want to show that you're a professional, right? That you're good. That at a moment's notice, if the client needs to pivot within within reason, that you can pivot with them. Okay. And they'll always come back for you for more work and stuff like that. They'll appreciate that kind of stuff. So again, like I said, it's totally possible that your client, whether that's a company or like an actual, like, you're working directly with some kind of stakeholder, they decide to, change the colors, right? That's a total possibility, right? It's a total possibility. Well, on Friday, we had gone over the stuff that we had done on Wednesday. And what we had done is we had hard coded the colors. So what we've done now is we have used some CSS variables, and on top of that, we extended Tailwind, right? We were able to add some new color definitions called primary, background, and surface. These are things that are not built into Tailwind, but the beautiful thing about Tailwind is that you have this configuration file, and we can extend Tailwind. We can add things that it didn't already exist there, okay? So what we did was, under theme, we extended the colors, okay? And so we added these three colors: primary, background, and surface. Now their values are kind of weird, right? It says var and then dash dash primary. So you're thinking, like, what the heck is that? And I kind of brushed over that part. So how does that stuff work? Well, in CSS, if you want to declare a variable, you just declare it using dash dash, okay? You just use the dash dash, and that creates a CSS variable. You can assign it anything you want. You can assign it a color like this, a hex value, or you can assign it something else, like, let's say, an image link, or like a font, or like something like pixels, like 50 pixels, like if you want to do some kind of sizing or something like that. You could totally do that, right? You can put anything you want. Any valid CSS value can totally go in here. In our case, we're using the CSS variables to hold hex colors. Again, it doesn't have to be a hex color. It could be an RGB color, right? As long as it's a valid CSS value, you're totally cool, totally fine. So what the heck is this? What is this var thing, right? Well, in CSS, if I want to actually extract this value, this CSS value, like, let's say, for instance, we create a class called dot button dash primary. Can I make this text bigger? There we go. So let's say we do something like this. Again, this is just going back to like CSS classes, right? So this is how we create a class. So the way we create a class in CSS is you just say dot. That's it, dot. And after that, the valid tokens are, alphanumerics, right? You can have a number in here as well. And then hyphens are okay, and so are underscores, okay? Now in here, we can just do something like, okay, well, let's say I want to change the background color, okay? But I want the background color to be the primary color. How would I do that? Well, you use the Var Utility, and the Var just basically says, get the value from the variable, and then you give it the variable. In this case, the variable I'm trying to extract the value from is dash dash primary, and that's it. So now background color, okay, is going to be assigned whatever is in here. So var is how we extract the actual value from here. You can't just do dash dash primary. That would be really cool. In fact, when I try and do that, you'll see that VS Code actually fixes it for me. It's like, oh, you're trying to get the variable? Let me help you there, right? So this is how it works. Now you might be asking yourself, okay, so why is it that when I go in Tailwind, everything's inside of a string, right? That's a very good question. And the answer to that is that because the var function is a CSS thing. So, let's say here I tried to do it the other way. I tried to say, var dash dash primary, for example. You're going to get this error, right? Because we're inside of JavaScript. It's like, what the heck is var? Var in Java is how you create a variable. It's not a function. So it's like, what are you doing, right? So you can't do this. Same thing like in CSS, these are valid CSS functions. One's called max, right? You can take the max of like, say 10 pixels and 5 pixels, right? You can do stuff like that. You could also do things like calc, right? These are valid functions, okay? These are valid CSS functions. You can't do that here. You can't say max and then like 10 pixels and then 5 pixels. You see what I mean? Like this is CSS stuff, right? And we're inside of a JS file, so we're in the JavaScript world. So you can't use the CSS stuff. So how can we tell Tailwind, which is supposed to be dealing with CSS, how can we tell it to use these CSS, functions, these CSS utilities? How can we tell it? Well, you just wrap it around in a double quotes, right? You give it as a string. Tailwind will then take that string and then parse it as real CSS. So Tailwind's going to handle all that stuff for you in the background. Okay, so you just say var dash dash primary, and that's it. And so Tailwind knows, oh yeah, this is var, the CSS. It's going to interpret this as CSS. So that this also includes us like putting in like our colors in here too. Like you can't do this, right? Like if this was a color, like you can't do that, right? Because we're inside of a JavaScript file. The hash symbol actually has meaning. Okay, so in here we're using it incorrectly. So how do you solve that problem? Well, if you wanted to give like hard code an actual hex color into Tailwind, you would say hash and then give it, paste in, the hex code, whatever, for your color. So you have to use it as a string. Okay, so that's why we had to do it this way, using strings. In the CSS world, you don't do that, right? You don't do that because this is valid CSS, right? We're in the CSS world, so you have to do it this way. There's no strings here. But here, we're not in the CSS world, we're in the JavaScript world, which is why we have to do this. Remember, we're inside of a JavaScript file. This is the configuration file for Tailwind, which is in the JavaScript world. Okay. All right. So now that we have that taken care of, I told you that I would come back to this problem right here. We have one hard-coded color here, and that's this text white. Now, why is it white in the first place? Well, it's because of contrast, right? Contrast. Okay, you think about that. Contrast. The text for this button, has to be white, right? It can't be green because if it's green, you can't tell. Now, if it's black, right, if you were to switch it to text black, Oh, this is the login page. All right, let me switch that back to white. Let's go to the login page. Change this to black. Okay. Now, you might think, well, that's pretty legible, right? That's legible. Okay, and yeah, it looks legible, but not everybody has the same eyeballs as we do. You know, you can probably see that and be like, yeah, that looks, you know, I can tell that's login, right? But other people, you know, have different, you know, their vision is slightly different from ours, right? They may see this and they probably can't see that it says login, right? So we're running into a problem called accessibility, right? It's possible that they can't see it, right? So people that are colorblind, for example, stuff like that. So in our case here, if you go to the material.io, under the resources, you go under the color palette creator, oh no, color interface tool. Go to the color interface tool. Okay. If you go, okay, hit got it, and then go to custom. Let's pull up the color that we used for the background, for the primary color. So here's the primary color. I'm going to grab that as hex. Now I'm going to paste it in here. So do hash and then paste it. Okay. Now here, what's really cool about this stuff is it actually tells you here what is a good recommended color for you to use against the primary color. So if I go to accessibility, it says here that, okay, if you use white text on this green color, it may not be legible, right? In fact, I'm not entirely sure if you can kind of tell, but even on like on my screen, for example, if I'm sitting kind of a little bit distance, this white text actually looks kind of blurry. If I highlight it, it looks a lot crisper. Now this black text here looks really crisp even from a distance. When I highlight it against the blue, you know, obviously turns white. So here it's basically telling you, hey, this is not legible, right? This is not legible. Normal text, not legible. You know, again, this is using like some kind of like algorithm or whatever. So it's basically telling you probably shouldn't use you probably shouldn't be using white text. Probably should be using black text. Now, the color that's here is not the same color that we're using. I think I picked a random color, but this is the one from Figma. And so I think Victoria had already gone through the accessibility, and so this is the correct color that we should be using. So we are not using, you know, the correct color. So let's change that. Let's use the correct color that's in Figma. You can actually see that these two colors are different. This one's really bright. This one's a little bit more, you know, matte color. So if you have a matte color that's not so bright, using white could work better. This green is very bright, so using a bright color like white might be hard to see, right? Using black text would work better. So let's actually get the primary color here. So we're going to right click, edit styles. We're going to grab this green. So now we have the green. Okay. And let's test it out. So here, we're going to change this hex color, paste that in. Okay. And then here on the interface, it's still saying that you should use black text. I kind of disagree. I think using white text, like it's getting there, you know. I think white text is still legible, but according to the accessibility chart here, it's saying that black text is, you know, better. That's saying that white is ineligible, not legible. So let's test that theory out. Let's see. So I'm going to paste the color that we should be using. And we can see it change here. So you can see we have this bright lime green color. We give it a chance. Now it's changed. Now we have this color. Okay. Now it's saying that the black is going to be it's going to have better visibility according to the material accessibility chart, which, you know, for all intents and purposes, you probably should be following. In this case, I think either way could go. there is a website that you can actually go to, and it can actually check the accessibility stuff. I'll probably have Victoria or Corbin show you how that works, so we can actually see if our website abides by the accessibility rules, right? If it's accessible, if it's A11 compliant, A11Y compliant. So in our case, I think it would be best that we actually just follow the accessibility here. That's telling us that you probably shouldn't use white text. You should probably use black text. So it's like, okay, so let's do that. Now you'll notice that we have this little part over here on this side. It says text on P. Basically, it's saying text on primary. It should be this color, which is 00000, which is black. Okay. Now this brings us back to this hard-coded color that we had here for the text. Now, we shouldn't have a hard-coded color like this, because what if we decided to have the primary color be a really, really bright color or a really, really dark color? And so dark text would make it super hard to see. So you would want to go from a really dark text to a bright text if the background turned really, really dark. Like let's say we had a purple color. Maybe white text would be better, depending on how bright or how dark the color is. So again, at the end of the day, we are trying to remove this text color here because it's hard-coded, it's black. We want this to change based off the background color. Okay, so how do we do that? We're going to introduce a new color that's on primary. So this color is not just for text, but any widget, any drawable that is going to be on some surface, anything that is the primary color, you should have it be the color that we're about to define in order to contrast so you can actually be able to see it. So in material, they told us you should have it be 00, which is black. So if you have any kind of widget, anything, any kind of element that is on a primary surface, you should be this color, black. It's like, okay, we'll do that. So we're going to add a new CSS variable. Now we need to update our Tailwind to grab it. Now, I personally like hyphens in my Tailwind stuff. I like to have hyphens instead of like camel casing. So I usually do something like this, on surface. However, because we're using a JavaScript object here, right? A JavaScript object, you can't have hyphens. So how do we get around this? Well, remember, in our talk about, proper keys, if you want to have a symbol that is not a valid token, right, for your variables, you just surround it with double quotes. Now you have a valid key on surface. Cool. And this one's just going to be, again, var -- on surface, or on primary. My bad. I think I did this wrong. On primary. There we go. So we have on primary, and there we go. We're going to create a new color on primary, which is going to be equal to whatever the -- on primary color is. Okay. Save that. So now in our login page, where's our login page? Oops, where did it go? Here it is. So in our login page, oh, whoa, why everything turned on primary is black. Why did everything turn blue? Did I miss something up here? Oh, something just freaked out over here. Okay, I will try and fix that. Let's see here. So we are on the login page. I don't see an issue here. Okay, well, let's fix this right here. So the way we fix this now is we just say the text should be on primary. Why? Because the background is primary. And so because the text is going to be on top of something that's a primary color, the text should be colored the on primary color. So let's save that. There we go. Now it's so weird that this background turned this color. Let me try and figure out real quick what's going on here. Background color for primary. Okay. So somewhere over here. It's saying that my background primary on primary. Why is my surface background color primary? BG surface. Oh, this should be surface. There it is. Okay, that fixes. That should fix that problem. Okay, there we go. Back to normal. Okay, cool. All right, so now we have this. So good. And so the reason why you want to do something like that is to distinguish between colors that are on top of a different color is for the following reason. So let's say we decided, so we go here to user interface. Let me make this bigger. So let's say that we changed it to like this nice blue color, right? This nice blue color. So we have this color now. So it's like, okay, we're going to change it to this primary color. So now I'm going to go over here to my CSS. I'm going to change it to this color. Let's take a look at what happens here. I'm going to compile. There we go. Can you see that text? Can you see the text here? You can kind of tell. You have to kind of look at it from a distance. From a distance, you can kind of read it, but it's really hard, right? It would be really nice if the text was white. Would it be nice if the text color would adapt based off the background color? And in fact, yes, we can do that. That's what these on colors are for. So here it's telling us that in this case, it's telling us that the text color should be white. But what I'm saying is that the on primary should actually turn to white. Not necessarily it being that it's because it's a text color, but it's just that it's an element that is on top of something that is a primary color. So that something needs to be colored on primary. So every time you change your primary color, you always need to change your on primary color to make sure that there's a nice contrast. Now here, even though we changed the color to blue, this button here still looks really nice. All right, it's legible. Okay, there's a nice contrast between that blue and the foreground widget, which is this text. Okay. All right, let me switch that back. Oops, too far. There we go. All right. So in app.js, let me comment out the login. Let me bring back the sign up. Okay. Now under sign up, we still have one hard-coded color, which is this text white. So we're going to change this to be, because the text is on top of a color, a background color that is primary, it needs to be colored on primary. There we go. And so based off the accessibility chart from material, it's saying that the dark color works best on this green color here. Okay. Okay, so far this is looking pretty good. This is looking pretty good. Right? Beautiful. Looks really cool. Really, really nice. All right. So now that we have that out of the way, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask, or if you guys have any comments like, oh, what about this situation or whatever, please let me know. Maybe I can answer it. All right. So, one of the topics I want to talk about today is something called theming, right? So what if you wanted to have like a dark mode, right? How would you do that? How would you create a dark mode, right? I have my CSS colors here, right? It's like, okay, so how would I create a dark mode? How would I do that? Well, it's simple. You use CSS classes. It's probably one of the easiest ways to do it. So here I would just say, I would create a CSS class called dark, okay? And then here I will just, basically reset the CSS variables, okay? So I'll say something like, okay, let's say the background color. So the background will be like, let's find a good color. So I don't want it to just, I'll start off with 000 for black, but I don't want it to be, black. When you do like dark mode, you should never go for black. You should go for like almost black. So it's like, so it's not like black. Here, let me switch this to hex. There we go. So you don't want to go for like, that looks pretty good. Okay. So those are dark. And our surface color, so this would be black right here, right? So let's do that. So how do we change this so that we can have dark mode enabled now? How do we do that? Well, remember how CSS works. CSS is cascading style sheets, right? So when you apply a rule to an element, they cascade. So just for now, just for testing purposes, all right, we're going to do this in code, but just for now, so we can have, dark mode enabled for our application, I'm going to go into public. I'm going to go into the index.html file. And inside of the HTML header, right there, on the HTML head, I'm just going to type in class. I'm just going to type in dark. Okay. Now, because I'm doing it at the very top level, remember, CSS cascades. So all the rules will cascade to all of the HTML elements thereafter. Remember, HTML, this is a tag, okay? Body is a child of HTML. So if the parent has this class, then its children will also inherit from that. So now, if I just hit save, you'll notice that now my background is dark because I have dark here. Now with JavaScript, we can actually enable and disable this. We can remove it and set it there. In fact, we can create all kinds of CSS themed classes that we want. Okay, so you can kind of see where I'm kind of taking you here. Okay, so this surface probably shouldn't be this color, right? The whole purpose of dark mode is that we're trying to prevent our eyes from bleeding. Okay, so maybe we change the surface color in dark mode. We change the surface color to like, I don't know, let's try C4. C4. So let's try this gray color, see if that works. Okay, so we hit save, give it a chance to compile. All right, now it's that gray color. So maybe that's probably still too bright. So let's bring it down. So bring it down. Okay, that's nice. That's a nice surface color. Again, you would have to have your designer. I'm not a designer, You would have your designer come in here and be like, hey, make me dark mode. Oh, that looks nice. Okay, that looks sick. Okay, cool. But now we have a problem here, don't we? The text here that's on the surface is what? It's starting to get hard to read, right? It would be nice if the text would become white. So how can we do that? Well, now we need to introduce a new color. So before we had the on primary, now we need to have an on surface. So in regular mode, this is kind of like, you can think of this as light mode. when you're on the surface, it makes sense because the surface is basically white, it's pure white. It would make sense that we contrast it with black, right? So now we need to update our code to reflect this thing. So we need to now introduce this new one called onSurface. So this is going to be the color of any kind of HTML element that can be colored that's going to be on the surface directly. We need to change its color to make sure that we're always contrasting. So here on Tailwind, for example, we'll add a new color. We're going to say on-surface. So again, using the CSS variable on surface that we created. There we go. Now all we have to do is, for example, we're on the sign up page. So let's open up the sign up page. Currently right now, the title, we never set a color because by default the color is black. So when we had a white surface, it looked great. But now that we're changing these colors, it doesn't make sense to have the default color anymore. So what do we do here? So what we can do here is like, okay, this text here, this header text, what is the surface that it's on, right? Well, it's on this div, which has a background color of what? Surface. So because the immediate parent has a color that is the surface color, it just makes logical sense that the text color should be the on-surface color. Okay. Now, right now, we haven't defined what that is. Well, we did. We defined it here, but because we're in dark mode, it's still black because we haven't overwritten this color. Okay. So we need to define that if you're in dark mode, your surface color should be FFF, which would be white. So if we're in dark mode, if you're an element that's on a surface, you should probably be white because the surface color is pretty dark. So you see now we have this nice contrast. See that? So now if we were to go over here into public index.html and remove the dark mode, so we're back to like regular mode, boom, the background is back to white, the surface is back to pure white, and the text switched to black because it knows it's on a surface. And we defined a rule to say if you're on a surface, because the surface is white, we need a contrasting color, which is black in this case. Again, your designer will do this, but I mean, you could do this yourself too. You know, start thinking about these things. Okay, so we're not completely done yet. So let's switch back to dark mode. Okay, there we go. And so, you know, another thing that you can do is, you know, you can start thinking about, okay, do my primary colors work in this instance? Does it work, right? This right here, does this look good to you guys? Like, does this look good? I think this looks okay, you know. I don't have that much experience with dark mode. Like thinking about input fields is like, okay, should the input fields be transparent or what? You know, this is kind of like what you have to think about, right? However, what's really cool is that we've been focusing on sign up, right? Sign up for bidder. But check this out. If we switch over to app.js, if we comment out login and sign up and bring back in login, we hit save, it looks the same, right? Except that we have one problem. We didn't change this text, but look, everything else worked out the same because we have those variables. So as long as we're following the rules, everything's going to fit just nicely. So here, let's go to the login. We're having an issue here where we have this text. Okay, we have this text whose parent has a transparent background, but its parent has a BG surface. So it just makes sense that here we change the text to on surface. Now this will turn white. Notice that I didn't tell it, hey, turn white. I didn't say that. See, that's the thing I want you guys to understand. I'm not telling it to turn white, and I'm not telling it to turn black. I have just defined a set of rules saying, okay, if you're on a background surface, you need to be the color on surface. It has nothing to do with whether or not it's text or not. Okay? It all has to do with the fact that, hey, you're on a surface. If you want to be drawn right on top of a surface with no background color, then you should probably be, your foreground color should be on surface. That's all I'm saying. It's very abstract, right? The details are abstracted away. But now, again, if we remove dark mode, we go switch back to light, everything works out. It's very simple. Look at that. So you can imagine on the top of your web page, you could have like a little toggle that switches dark mode, light mode. And all it's doing is removing this class from the very top. Look how easy that is. Is that not cool? We just enabled dark mode into our application. And it's very simple, just because we're following these very simple rules. Follow the rules, it'll make your life easier. All right, so that's theming. So that's dark mode, right? So like, what happens if you're like, oh, well, you know, what if we also want to have a purple theme, right? You want to have a purple theme. Well, why not? Well, you can have like, you know, maybe come up with a good naming convention. Maybe you call it like theme purple. So instead of dark, we call it theme dark, like that. So in our index.html, we do theme dark if we want dark mode, right? There you go. Now, what happens if you want purple? I want to have a purple theme now. I hit save. It goes back to regular light mode. Why? Because these are the defaults. These are the defaults. These are the defaults. Okay, these are the defaults right here. When we create a new CSS class, we're overriding these CSS variables. So if I want to say, okay, I want the primary color to be, and then let's find a cool purple from Material.io. That's a nice purple. So let's pick this purple. What's going on here? It's not working anymore. Okay, let's pick a nice purple. A nice purple. Yeah, I'll go with this purple. Whatever. All right, so there's that purple. We copy that color. And on the primary color, we do hashtag. Boom. There's a primary color. What about the background? Well, you know, we'll keep it the same. We'll keep the light color the same. The surface colors, we'll keep that. On primary probably needs to change, right? On primary needs to change because look, over here it's saying like that, hey, if you're on a primary color, your background should be FFF, right? It should basically, we're saying it should be white. So on primary, hashtag, do F, you don't have to do that many Fs, you can just do 3, right? Doesn't really matter, but whatever. And I think that's it. Cool. So if I hit save, oopsie daisy, I hit save, all this is going to switch to purple and it's going to look sick. So I hit save and just give it a moment to recompile real quick. And then all this stuff should turn purple. And look, it looks sick. Right? Sweet. Alex is saying, did we originally delete the index.html file? No. It's in the public folder, so it's under public and then index.html. And then we're adding a class to the HTML, and that's what's allowing us to switch back and forth. So I can do theme, dark, hit save, give it a moment to compile, boom. If I just completely remove this, it goes back to light mode. If I do theme, you know, purple. Now we have a purple theme. You could even do like a dark purple. I don't know. Sky's the limit at this point. You can just literally do whatever you want. And then what you could do is you could have like what you could do is you could have like a little drop down here, kind of like on my website, because this is effectively what I'm doing. On my website, you go here, switch to light mode, purple, dark, and look how I do it. Like, see right here, you can even see how I'm doing, how I'm achieving this effect. In fact, I'm pretty sure like 80 or 90% of the people that have something like this on their website, this is basically what they're doing. So here you can see it says dark, and then I switch it to light. Boom, it says light, purple. It says purple now, right? And all I'm doing is changing this one thing. I'm doing all that through JavaScript. Because I already the variables are already defined. Like you can see right here on purple, I just overwrite purple in primary because the root has already defined all of these colors, right? The default that's in my root is going to be a bright version. So since all I want to do is just change the primary color to like a purple color, all the other colors, the background, the surfaces, makes sense because I still want it to be bright, but I just want it to be purple. Okay, but when I switch it to dark mode, notice the dark mode not only changes the background, surfaces, and stuff like that, right? It has to change a lot more. Okay, the primary color, I keep it the same, so it stays as blue, the royal blue. Okay, so you can see how that works. Okay, switch it to light. It's just the root. These are the default colors that I have already defined ahead of time. Okay, so these are all the colors I defined. They all have meaning. And I just change the ones that I need to change. Purple, I just change primary and primary variant. It gives me my nice purple version. Here's dark mode. Boom. Easy, simple. It looks super, it looks super sophisticated and stuff, but it's very simple. You just follow these simple rules and you can achieve all kinds of stuff. Now, the one thing that's annoying me is that this bitter right here, the logo, is not changing color, right? How can we achieve that? How can we get it to achieve the same color? So let's go to the login page. Now, recall that our logo is actually an SVG. Okay, it's an SVG. So let's check out our SVG. So we have it under source, assets, icons, logo. Now, we have to see if this already has a color associated with it. So on here it says fill none. And then I don't see a color here, but maybe it's over here. Yes, it has a stroke and this is the color. So I'm going to remove this stroke. I don't want the SVG to have a color. Now it's going to be white. It's still there, it's just you can't see it anymore. Under fill, I'm gonna use a special keyword here that says current color. It's saved. And so the current color here is black. So there's that black color. That's why it looks all funky. Okay. So here now my logo, I can do a class name. I can do text, primary, hit save. Now it's this purple color. Now, it seems like this SVG, the way it got exported, is kind of funky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually change this back to none. And then it seems like the color needs to be placed on this one. That's what it seems to be. So I'm going to change the stroke color to current color. I think that should solve our problems. There we go. So for SVGs, a little bit more complicated. It depends on like how it gets drawn. This was drawn in Figma, and then we just did a simple export, so we didn't really have much control. Usually the colors are being defined at the very top of the SVG, like over here. But in this case, this path had the correct color. But notice that now bitter is now this purple color. Okay? And if we were to change, for example, if we were to remove this, so it goes back to the regular color, which is like that blue color, now it's blue. So weapons, we do like theme dark, right? Well, the primary color is still this, green color, so it stays the same. Isn't that cool that we can achieve that? That's pretty cool. Now, if you don't want your SVG to be affected, for example, you could have a primary color, but you could also, if you needed to be a little bit more specific, you could also have a brand color. So you could have a brand, right? And so like, let's say the brand, was going to be this color, right? That's your brand, right? That's our brand. So even if we have a purple theme, anything that's marked brand, we actually don't want to color. For example, the logo should always be that blue color or that green color, even if we do switch it to a purple. I don't know. The rules will depend on the company, right? Because you have to respect their branding. Okay. So if we were to do that, for example, then again, if we introduce a new variable here in Tailwind, we would have to bring that in. So brand var -- brand. So this is now our brand color. So brand colors can be different from primary colors. It's totally possible. It's totally possible they're going to be different. So an example here would be like, okay, no matter what color, I want my SVG to always be the brand color. And I forgot to mention that in order to color SVGs respect the foreground color. Okay, so you need to change the text color in order to change the SVGs, their colors. So that's why I'm using text, because SVGs they respect the color property, and in Tailwind, in order to change the color property, use the text. That's just how that works. So there we go. Now we have text brand. So there we go. So we have dark mode there. And if I change this to theme, say purple, let's say the teams are like, nah. Our brand's always going to be blue, even if we changed it to be purple or whatever. It's like, okay, we want the brand color to be different. Then this is how you would go about solving that problem. Okay. Okay. In our case, I don't really care. I think it would look cool if this color also changes. So I want to actually have where is the login? So many files. There you go. I actually want this to be I want the logo to be based off of the primary color. So if we change it to be purple, it turns purple, and if it's green, it changes to that green color. Okay, cool. Close everything up. All right, how much time do we have left? Okay. So now that we have this, okay, so we did theming, CSS classes with Tailwind. Okay, cool. So we extended Tailwind. We've added new colors. I showed you theming. So, on your own apps, you can now have dark mode if you want. You can also have purple mode. Okay, cool. Now, I haven't shown you the JavaScript, so you can actually have like a little switch here. Again, like on my website, all I have is this little drop down. I just switch like between here. Okay, so yeah, it's very fast, So I switch dark, go to SoDA, whatever. You can see it's all like that, whatever. Okay. Oh, and it saves. I don't know if you guys noticed. So if I go back to my website, it says light mode. I switch it to dark mode and I close it and I go back. It says dark mode. You can actually see it kind of switch from light to dark. And that's because I'm storing some of the information here under application. Theme value says dark. If I switch it to light, it says light. Switch it to purple, it says purple. So actually storing some information onto the browser. So when you come back to it, it actually stays. Okay. So I'll show you how to do that probably like in another session, not today. Okay. So the reason why is because we need to make some of these buttons actually work. So I'm going to just remove this. We'll come back to that later. This is the default colors. that we have. Okay. Now, under app.js, we have the login screen. This is the login screen, but we also want to have it so like, okay, here's a login screen. Okay, so what if you're not a user yet? We want to be able to click sign up and actually go to that. So how do we do that? Well, the way you do that is we need to add a new package, and we're going to say npm I React router. Let me make this bigger. So React router, and then React router dash DOM. So you need to install these two packages in order for us to get something called routing to work. So npm I React dash router space React dash router dash DOM. You can install these one at a time, or you can install these both at the same time. I'm going to install them both at the same time. So there we go. So these two things will have to be installed. Okay, cool. So that's done. Throw that away. Okay, cool. So now all we have to do is import it and say import from. So I did these curly braces, right? So I'm going to fill this in, but I just want to bring this in first. So from React router DOM. Okay. There's a couple things we need to bring in. One thing called a browser router. I'm going to bring this in. I'm going to alias it. It's pretty typical that we alias this as router, just because browser router is kind of long to type. So if you look at the documents, everybody always aliases it. So we do router. We need to bring something called a switch in. We need to bring something called a route. Okay. And this is more or less all we're really going to need. Okay. All right. Does anybody have any questions up to now? Let me check the Discord, see if anybody's asking any questions. Victoria's excited about local storage and customization. Yes, customization is fun. Okay, so nobody has questions. All right. So now we need to create a way to switch between, these routes. So the way we do this actually is we do something like this. So we do all this. So we're going to use something called a switch. Okay, this is what we brought in from the React router DOM. If you're using React Native, you would use React-router-native. Okay, but since we're using a web, since we're using the web version of React, we're using DOM. Okay. Okay, so just letting you know, React router also is something you can use with React Native. All right, so here we just created something called a switch. Or first, we need to wrap everything inside of a router. Okay, that's the main part. So you gotta wrap everything inside of a router. Then we need to build a switch. Okay, and then it's kind of like a switch statement. Case this, case that, blah 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 blah. It's kind of like that, except that we're going to build routes. Okay, so we have a route. Okay, it's self-enclosing, or you can have you don't have to have it self-enclosing, but I like to do this. All we do now is say path. So path what? So I'm just going to say that if you're in the home, if you're home, now we just got to say, okay, so what component should we render? Okay, you need to feed it a component now. Now we're passing components as props. So how do we do this? Well, if you're home, we want to show the login. So just pass in login just like that. Okay. Whoops. So if you go home, you're going to go to the login page. If you're in /sign-up, again, you can pick whatever you want, right? Call it, banana. I don't care. Make something that makes sense. So /sign-up makes sense to me, so I'll call it that. So what component should we render? So again, using JSX, we say component equals, and then we're going to the JavaScript world, hence the curly braces. And inside here, we're going to pass the component, which is sign up. That's our sign up components from up here. Okay. All right. And that's it. Hit save. Okay. Nothing exploded. Great. Perfect. Okay. So now we need a way to navigate. So when I click sign up, when I click the sign up button, I want to be taken to the sign up page. So how do I do that? Well, let's go to login. And then here we have this button. Okay. So right now this button is here and it says sign up. So that's fine. Now, right now I just had it as a button. Okay, I just had it as a button. But because clicking on this, button or widget is supposed to take us to a different route, you shouldn't be using a button. You should be using something called a link instead, right? Now there's a difference between a link and a button. The difference is A is something called an anchor tag. It's supposed to take you to a different location. It actually has something called an href, right? So we want to switch it from a button to something like that. However, since we're using React Router DOM, we need to use its special component to create links. Say from React Router DOM. Okay, and then here we're bringing in something called a link. Okay, it's a special component. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to switch this to a first. Let's test something out. So I'm gonna comment this out real quick. Bring in that link. Okay, bring in this link. Yeah, I'll bring it like that. And I'm gonna call this sign up. That's our text. And then there's a new prop in link. So we say to. That's basically saying where should we go? We want to say /sign-up. That's where we want to go. Okay, that's where we're trying to get to. Okay. So I'm gonna hit save. Let's go back, see what it looks like. There's our sign up. Now, pay attention to my mouse. When I hover over the sign up, you're going to notice that my mouse changes. Okay. Just like buttons, when you hover over a button, we get that thing, but look over here on the bottom. It's actually telling us where we're going to go. It says localhost :3000 sign up. So when I click on this, notice that the URL changed. Now it says sign up. Yet I'm still seeing the login. Right? I'm still seeing the login. Okay. So what gives? Right? What's the problem here? Right? What's the problem here? Well, it actually has to do with this. Okay? It actually has to do with this. Notice that we have the home here first. So the way it works is it does like a very soft comparison. It's because it does more of a contain. So if the URL path contains this, it's going to just go ahead and just draw this. Now, if we look at this, Does it have a forward slash in the URL? Yes. Okay, so it's done, right? It's like, yeah, I found it. Okay, it's done, right? So it's just going to do a soft check. So if we were to like flip this around, put this one on the top and then the home at the bottom and hit save, now we go back. Now it says sign up. So if we remove the sign up part, hit enter. Remember, when there is no forward slash, it's implied. So now I'm home. If I click sign up, it takes me here. If I go back, I'm back to the log because this thing is gone now. Now Bob, Jim Bob is exactly right. There's another option. What if you wanted it to look like this? Still have the home at the top, but I still want to be able to hit sign up and then navigate to that page. So you can actually switch the way it checks. So instead of it just seeing if it contains this string, you can say it has to be an exact match. If I do an exact match, does it have a forward slash? Yes. But is the URL just a forward slash? No. Right? It says slash sign up now. So by just changing this to say exact, if I click on sign up, it's going to take me to sign up because it doesn't just have the forward slash. It has forward slash sign dash up. So it's completely different. Okay. So you can use exact on all of them if you'd like. Though I would hesitate to recommend that because sometimes you want to add query parameters, and query parameters will throw it off. So we'll talk about that, and once we get the backend working, we'll talk about query parameters. All right, cool. So now we have this. I'd like to go. If I click on the login button, I'd like to go back. Okay, I'd like to go back. But first, let's try and fix this this link here. This link is all, it doesn't look good. We lost all of our styles. So how can we have our styles be in here? Well, you can actually pass in a class name into link. So all we have to really do is just copy this class name, all the stuff that we have for our button. Just copy this. Copy this and paste it. Hit save. There we go. Now, the thing you'll notice is that the text is no longer centered. It's left a line. Okay, it's left a line. So we're going to have to fix that. So the way you do that is you say text dash, text dash center. And now we have center text. Okay, so we brought our styles back in, but because buttons automatically center the text, anchor tags do not center the text. Okay, so those are the differences between how things are drawn between buttons and anchor tags. So now we can go ahead and just delete this. So we don't need this button anymore. All right, hit save. Okay, so we just have sign up and login. So we click on sign up, boom. When we click log in, maybe you want to go back to the login page or something like that. So how do we do that? So again, we click on the sign up. This is the one that's supposed to take us back to the login page. So I'm going to bring in, so I'm going to say import from React router DOM. And I'm bringing in the link. I'm going to switch this button, hit F2. I'm going to switch this to link like that. So it switches it there. And then all I'm going to do is say to / I want to go home. Now the other thing is, again, because these links convert them to anchor tags, they're no longer buttons. We need to center the text. So I'm just going to say text dash center. Hit save. So now when I'm in my sign up, if I hover over my login, you'll notice that on the bottom here, it changes to localhost :3000. So if I click this, it takes me back to home. Click sign up, takes me here. Boom, 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 boom. That's it. Very cool, huh? All right. Does anybody else have any questions on that? Are you guys good? None? All right. Cool. So I want to do one last thing here. Basically, I want to start setting up the backend. I think Corbin's going to do a talk on MongoDB. So that's gonna where we're gonna store all of our data. So I just want to set the project up so Corbin can go in and show you guys on Wednesday some MongoDB. So let me just set that up real quick. All right, so let me close all this here. And now let me move up one directory, back in. Okay, and I'll be pushing this to GitHub so you guys have something. All right, so here we'll just say npm init. Oops, let me just do npm init -y, create a project here. Okay, let's do a git init. This is already a, okay, so this already is one. Okay, cool. Now, so I'm just gonna set some stuff up. So for your backend, we need to have a couple things. So we're going to install, we're going to be building an Express application. So we're going to add Express, npm I Express. Okay, cool. So that's the first package we're going to bring in. Next, we're going to create an index.js file. That's going to be our starting point. Okay, and here let's just write the boilerplate to have an node, an Express application. So we say const Express is equal to require Express. Okay, this is all stuff that we've already done in past weeks. We're going to create our application, app, Express, call it like a function. There we go. And then for the port, we can say const port, use capital letters, is equal to, and then, we'll use, 50/50. Okay, we'll use port 50/50. Now we're going to say app.listen on this specific port. Give it a callback. Say console.log listening on port. Okay. We'll add one route, a get route for / that's home, request, response. Now we're just going to do is respond dot, we'll send JSON back, and we're just going to say something like message home. That's about it. Okay, so this is super boilerplate, doesn't really do much. We'll start this. So npm start. Yes. So we'll go to the scripts here. We'll remove this. We're going to say on start, we're going to say node index.js. Okay. npm start. And so now we have listening on port 50/50. So now if I go here, I can do localhost 50/50, and I'll get back some JSON. Okay, so it's up and running. So my server's up and running. If I go to Postman, we'll try it here as well. We'll say localhost 50/50. Hit send. Boom. Gets JSON, says message home. Okay, and that's about it. Okay. So here's a boilerplate server, Node.js server. So we're going to use this as the starting point for our backend. We will be using MongoDB, but we will also be using MySQL. We're actually going to use both. In fact, should I do it? Yeah, okay. So let me set up some stuff here. So I'm gonna create a folder called source. Okay. And then in here, we're going to have, we need to have a proper structure for our code. So we're going to have something called a services. Okay. We're also going to have a place here called routes. Okay. I'm going to talk about routes as well. So in our services, we're going to create a service. So since we're going to be creating users, right? We're going to be creating users. We want to have something called a user service. Okay, .js. So this service is what's going to allow us to actually create users, find users, possibly delete users, and update users. So that's kind of like the entire point of this service here. Now this service is going to be a class. So class user service, just like that. Okay. So we're going to have a constructor that does nothing for now. Now this user service is supposed to, you're supposed to think about it as like an abstract class. Now we can't have abstract classes in vanilla JavaScript, right? You need something like TypeScript in order to do something like that. Okay. So we can't have an abstract class here, but we can at least create methods. Okay, we're going to create some methods here, but we're not going to implement anything. So the idea here is that the user service is supposed to be a base class that we will then have, the MongoDB service, that's going to be our data layer, that's going to actually, use or create a user service that's going to be using MongoDB. So the whole reason why I'm doing something like this is because we want to be able to switch between the technologies, at a flip of a switch. So what do I mean by that? When you're architecting a service layer, okay, so we're talking about services now. Specifically on data layers, so like on data layers. Okay, when you're architecting this, you have to think, okay, what's the technology that I'm going to be using? Oh, MongoDB. Okay, that's fine. But what if at some point we want to switch to something else, a different technology? Let's say MySQL or Postgres or, a text file, something. Who knows? I don't know. You want to change something. So how do you do it? Well, we need to have a base class, a base service. So we'll have we'll call this just like a base. I need to get a pen or something. A base service that can do basic stuff. In this case, we're focused on Crud Operations. That is create, read, update, delete. So we have a base service, not services. We have a base service. Okay. Now, actually, let's look at it this way. Look at it this way. We have our. Why is it so thin? Okay, so we have our web app here. Okay, it's our little computer right there. Okay, it's our computer, and it's going to do a request. Okay, so this is the internet. That's the internet. So we're going to do a request to the internet, and the internet's going to hit one of our servers. Okay, this is a server. Beep boop, beep boop. Okay, this is our server. So it's going to do some kind of request, like let's say, it's trying to get, /user 1. So we're trying to get a user. So we're going to hit our server. Our server, again, is a Node.js application. Or I guess if you want to be more specific, it's an Express app. So express.js. Express does not hold any of your data. That's not the way it works. So your Express app, when you do some request on get, again, this is supposed to be user /1, let's just say. your Express application is going to have a specific route. That's the /user. That's the route. This is the route portion. Again, sorry for the terrible handwriting. I'm doing this on a mouse. Your Express application's route will then need to communicate with something called a service. So in our case, we have a user service that's then going to communicate with, and you've seen this symbol, I'm pretty sure, a bunch of times. This right here is our database. Okay. What is this database? Well, this database could be MongoDB. Or it can be, you know, MySQL. The point is that it doesn't matter. The user service shouldn't actually care if you're trying to get data from MongoDB or MySQL, because at the end of the day, the data that needs to be sent back, right? The data that's actually getting sent back has to have a certain shape, a certain form. So regardless if you're getting it from MongoDB or MySQL, the data that you send back to the client must be of a certain predictable shape, or else your API is going to be really hard to work with if it's unpredictable. It has to be predictable, okay? So how do we make it predictable? You use like a middle service. So this user service is going to be that. So here we're just going to define some CRUD operations. Like on a user service, we can say like create user. What does that look like? We want to be able to delete a user. What does that look like? We want to be able to update a user. Okay, what does that look like? We want to be able to get a user. What does that look like? Right, now we have to think about, these are just basic CRUD operations. Okay, these are basic CRUD operations. What we then need to do is we need to define what a user looks like. So we can actually do that. So usually you would do this, you know, with a class, right? Now we can totally do that ourselves. We can do that with, you know, we can create a class here called like user. So like, okay, so what does a user contain? We have a constructor here. And so a user could be like, okay, so we have this dot, I don't know, a user maybe has a username. That's a string. Maybe it has an email. That's a string. Maybe it has a first name, as F name, and that's a string. L name, and that's a string. Okay. You know, stuff like this. This is what we're trying to do here. Maybe we even have a birthday or something like that. Okay. So this is a user. So this is a basic thing, and that's it. Right. That's a user. Okay. So when you create a user, right, you should return a new user, right? Because you're trying to create a user. This is all the stuff that you need to have. But a user needs to also have what? An ID. Right? An ID could be like, it could be a string or it could be a number. But the question then becomes, okay, so who adds the ID? Right? Who adds the ID to the user? So if you know, if I'm creating a form to create a user, like, you know, let's say I'm trying to sign up from like a social media application. Do I put my user ID in there? That's something that the backend is supposed to create for me, right? This unique identifier, right? So the username is something that I could feed it, you know. An email could also be something that could identify me, but what if this, you know, what if I want to allow somebody to change their email? This may not be unique enough, right? So we can't use that. The username, maybe we can add a restriction so it's like, okay, the usernames has to be unique and they can never change. Okay, well maybe we could use this to identify a person. Okay, but it may not be enough, right? So what we usually always have to build is we need to build some kind of ID, okay? Now the problem becomes is like, okay, if I create a user, what is the information that I need to pass in order to create a user, right? I can't pass it an ID. Now, why is that? because that information does not come from me. The person that's doing the sign up, they don't feed that information. You can feed all this other information, but this information, you can't feed it. So you're kind of stuck, right? So there's only a certain amount of information that you can actually provide to a backend that can actually create your profile. So Jim Bob saying MySQL can auto increment an ID. Yeah, so that's totally true. So you can totally do something like that, auto increment. That's one way. I don't recommend that as your IDs, only because like if you use an ID that just auto increments every time you add a user, that's actually valuable information, right? Because if I wanted to know who's the next user, if I know my user ID, all I have to do is add one. Okay, so when you're competing against other platforms, other services, other companies, you don't want to tell them how many users you have. You don't want to tell them exactly how many users you have. Now, if you have an auto increment ID, it's very easy to just be like, okay, we're just going to write a quick script that increments by one, do a fetch, and as soon as we get a 404, we know how many users this company has. That's valuable information to have, right? So you may not want to do that. So you actually want to create an ID that's randomly generated, right? So we'll talk about that. So what I'm trying to get at here, I'm going into backend, even though I probably shouldn't. We need to create something called a user DTO. So this is what's called a data transfer object. So a DTO stands for data transfer object. It's basically, you can think of a DTO as a subset of your actual object. So here we'll have all of this information minus the ID. It's a subset. See that? So when we create a user, for example, we want to pass in the user DTO. Okay, using JS docs, we can actually provide the type for this, which is a user DTO. Okay, and when we create a user, what we actually want to do is we want to then return an actual user somehow. We will return a user. Now, we can't do this directly because going to a database could take some time. It's not instantaneous. It's not a synchronous process. It's asynchronous. So how can we make this process asynchronous? We got to talk about promises. So I pass in a user DTO, a data transfer object, which is a subset. It's a special plain old object, which is a subset of your actual object that we're talking about. And then you pass in a DTO, and in response, you'll get the actual user, the actual object. So that's how a create user should look like. But we're using something called a promise. The reason why you're using a promise is because it's not going to be instantaneous. Hitting the database is not an instantaneous task. In fact, when you hit a database, you get put into a queue, so it takes some time for it to resolve. It's not a synchronous task. It takes some time because it's an IO operation. Okay, so when we delete a user, what should we have? So let's talk about that. So when we delete a user, we want to delete a user by, let's say, a user ID. So we'll pass an ID here. Now this is totally bad, right? But we'll just go with this. So the param here is going to be, the user ID will be a string. Okay, so our IDs will be strings, let's just say, for example. If you want to update a user, how do we update a user? Well, we need to know which user you want to update. So we want to update it by ID, and then we need a user DTO. So we need two params, param, string, this is the ID, and then we need another param. This is the user DTO. This is the user DTO. Okay. So now we have a way to create a user by passing a DTO. We then get we return a brand new user. When we when we delete a user, we're going to delete it. The parameter is a type of string, and we give it an ID. We'll talk about this. This is called JS docs, so we'll talk about this. Maybe I can have Corbin briefly talk about, this stuff so he kind of knows what I'm trying to do here. I'm sure he understands. So when we delete a user, maybe we just want to return a Boolean. We'll just return a Boolean. Now, this requires a token severe security risk. Okay, so I'm gonna do a to-do here. To-do. This requires a token. So a lot of these things that, when you create a user, you don't need a token because it's the first time. Delete a user, you need a token. Update a user, you need a token. So this also needs a, we'll just put it right here as well, just so I remember. We need to add a token. So the tokens we're going to be using is something called JWT. We're going to talk about JWT as well. JWT. The backend is going to be like heavy, like knowledge that you guys haven't seen before. Maybe you have, so this would be like review. So we're going to talk about a lot of security stuff as well. Like JWT is going to be a big one. So when you update a user, we want to return just a user. But again, this can take some time to update the user, update the database. So we need to have a promise here. Promise returns a user. If we want to get a user, perhaps we don't need a token. So get a user, we'll just do it by, a specific ID. So at param string ID. Okay. Cool, and there's our user service, right? Create, so create, let me push this read. So we have create, right? Create, oops, I think I did too much. So we have a way to create, read, update, and delete. So this is how you update a user. Okay. Create, read, update, and delete. These are our CRUD operations. Okay. CRUD. Create user. The read is the get user. The update is the update user. And the delete is the delete user. Now, because we're talking about Node.js, we have modules. We have to do exports, or module.exports is equal to this user service. And we might also have to export these guys as well. So what we can do is we'll export multiple user DTO. So there we go. So we're going to export the user object, the user DTO, and then our actual user service. Now I notice that the user doesn't really do anything. It's just a container, an object that's going to contain various information. That's it, right? And our user service is going to basically, this is what's going to interface with our database, our data layers, okay? This is our service. Now notice here, we're not making there is absolutely no reference to MongoDB or MySQL, none, okay? In the future, when I do my portion of the database stuff, so Corbin's going to talk about Mongo, and we'll talk about that as well. When I do mine, we're going to talk about MySQL, okay, or MariaDB in this case. So we're going to talk about MySQL, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to say const user service is equal to require / user service. We're going to create a class, MySQL user service. We're going to say extends user service. So this is a user service, yes, dot user service. So Yeah, unfortunately, this looks kind of funky because I'm exporting an object out, but that's beside the point. We'll fix this so it looks a little bit nicer. But yeah, so here we have our MySQL. And what's really cool is that here we can actually override these. So for example, when we get a user, right, they're supposed to pass us an ID, right? If you look at the get user, they need to pass us an ID. So we can just actually just copy this just so we know here, like that. And I totally forgot that we have to do a returns promise. We're going to return a user. So here, it returns a user, a promise that returns a user. Okay. Okay. Now, later on, probably on Friday or Monday, depending on how much Mongo we need to go over, we will eventually do something like this. Okay. Don't worry about it right now, but eventually this is what's going to happen. We're going to do a connection. We're going to do a query. It's going to look something like this. We're going to do a query. And inside of here, we're going to do a SQL statement. We're going to say select everything from users where, and then ID equals question mark. We're using prepared statements, and there's a thing called values. And here we're just going to pass an ID. And then we're going to have a function here that takes in an error, a results, and the fields, like that. And then here we have our actual result. So here we're actually going to be using SQL, right? When we actually get ready to use this, we're going to actually be using SQL. But what I'm trying to get at is that this user surface is basically acting kind of like an interface, right? It's supposed to be an abstract class, which has no reference to MongoDB or MySQL. And then over here, we do make that reference. We're going to have this connection object eventually in the future, which is going to be an actual MySQL connection. So when somebody calls this user service and says, hey, I want to get the user ID, we will be doing a we will be doing a MySQL query. Corbin should build a service that looks just like this, except that one's going to be based off Mongo, not MySQL. Okay. You'll see how services work. I'll have to do a talk. I wasn't expecting to do this today, but I will be doing a talk probably on Friday. We're going to go over something called, if you guys want to look this up already on your own time, the topics we're going to be talking about is something called Dependency Injection, Dependency Injection Container, Services, and Service Locator. Okay. So these are the topics that we're going to talk about on Friday. So if you wanted to get a job as a backend developer, these are probably some of the stuff that you need to know. In fact, this actually helps you with mobile development, especially dependency injection. If you've ever worked with something called Java Spring. I've been working on my own app for a while, and I did all my queries as middleware inside my server JS file, starting to think my code is just spaghetti. That is spaghetti, yes. Yeah, that's not a good way of doing that. I would recommend something different. I can show you an example of something I did very recently. So you guys kind of see how this is going to like all play out. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. So this is kind of like where I'm trying to take you guys. So we have this routes. Here are some users. Okay. So we have a get request on a user's route. Okay. So this is how it's going to work. We use something called a service locator to find the service by a name. Okay, so we find it. There's our service. This is our user service. In our user service, we can get all the users, for whatever reason. Or we can get a user by a specific ID. Okay, so we locate the service, we found it, then we just await it, get user by this ID. We're doing asynchronous code because we don't know, where it's coming from, right? Okay, so that's cool, right? So we can go right here, go to definition. If I go here, here's my user service. I also have a thing called base service or whatever, doesn't matter. But you'll notice here that here are these methods here, and they don't do anything really. In fact, these probably shouldn't be asynchronous. Well, I guess it could be like that. Okay. All right. So that's it. They're basically they're not implement. In fact, I actually force it to throw an error if you try to you know, use this without actually using one of the super classes. So if I go to something like, let's say, here's my MariaDB user service. This looks very different. Okay, so you'll notice that here's my user service. Here's how you create a user. It does nothing, but it's giving you the scaffold. It's the blueprints. But then to actually create a user, it takes this much code to actually create a user using SQL, right? This is using some error checking, but this is the code that's going to take just to create a user. In fact, to do these CRUD operations, it's going to take us about somewhere around 200 lines of code to get this done, roughly. Ours might take more because this is actually like a super broken down version, but you can kind of see that there's some thought that needs to put in. But here's the beautiful thing. If you look at the routes and how they're actually done, look how small the code is. Like, it's really small. It's very lightweight. It's like doesn't do much. But the service locator using dependency injection is like the really powerful part. So there's no spaghetti here, right? The service, this user service could be using MariaDB or it could be using MongoDB. It doesn't care, right? As long as you implement it properly. And all this dependency injection is going to happen in our setup. I have this database set up. I forget where. I think it's over here. Yeah, right here. I'll be showing you guys all of this stuff. So here I create a MySQL stream service with a connection. And then on the service locator, I set the service just like that. And that's basically it. But you unlock this one has almost 400 lines of code. So it's 350. This one's a little bit bigger. Let's create stuff. This is for like a streaming service that I was working on. But anyways, yeah. That's the powerful thing about doing stuff like that is that you're trying to separate out dependencies from your code as much as possible, and you're trying to, separate everything out. So the benefit of that is that it makes your code easier to test. So if there's a problem with MySQL, some reason, there's a problem for some reason, users aren't getting created, we can test against that, right? We can write unit tests to just test against, all kinds of cases. We can even mock things using Jest and the mock API. We can mock a lot of things. So that's kind of like the reason why you want to go this route. It's a lot of code, a lot of boilerplate, a lot of setup, but once you have it ready, it's easy to test, it's easy to maintain, it's easy to add extra features, it's easier to extend, and if for whatever reason you needed to change your backend services, like switch from Mongo to MySQL or Postgres, or like some kind of like, Google whatever, you could totally switch it with like no problem. You still have to create the class and the scaffold and build it out, but like you don't have to like touch all of the other code, right? The routes is what's going to kill you if you don't do this properly. For example, Jim Bob, he's using, MySQL, I think now. But like, what if I tell him, hey, stop using MySQL and switch over to MongoDB? Rip Jim, because now he has to go through every single route and he has to basically remove MySQL from all this code, and it's going to be a pain in the butt, and it's going to introduce bugs, and so yeah. So we're not going to be doing that. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do this properly. It's overkill, but it's proper. It's like industry standards. Anyways, kind of over time now, but you'll have fun on Monday learning about Mongo, or Wednesday with Corbin. All right. So if anybody has any questions, if that's it, I will see you guys on Friday. On Wednesday, we'll have Corbin do MongoDB. And yeah, so rip Jim with the spaghetti code, but it's okay. You know, you live and you learn. All right. So if anybody has any questions, I'm gonna head out. All right. So I'm just gonna wait a little bit, see if you guys have any questions. No questions? All right. Make sure to come on Wednesday when Corbin's going to be talking about MongoDB. All right. Bye, everyone.